Welcome to this first lesson on After Effects. Let's jump right in at square one, opening the program. I have it pinned to my taskbar down here, so I'm going to click the icon, the splash screen will load, and then we will jump into the After Effects workspace. I'm using After Effects version 2020, but the core fundamental features of After Effects has not changed in over 10 years, so you should be able to follow along no matter what version you're using. This home window I tend to just close unless I'm opening one of the most recent projects I've worked on. So I'm just going to close this here, and let's just make sure we're all starting on the same page and reset the workspace. And you can always go back to this too, in case you accidentally click and drag something and dock it somewhere else, and now everything is screwed up and you don't know what you just did. You can always go to Window, Workspace, Reset Default to Saved Layout. Now we're back to where we started. We should all be on the same page and have a very similar looking workspace. So there's a couple different windows here. You can see the blue outline highlights every time I click over a different one. So there's basically four main areas. We have the kind of viewer here, which is going to be where we see the work that we do, like the actual video or photos that we use or motion graphics we create will appear right here. Then the layers we use to build those compositions are going to be down in this bottom part, and those are going to appear as layers here. The assets that we use for that are going to be stored and organized in this area, this project window. And then on this right tab, we basically have different ways we can use effects and control properties in our project, like the fonts, the colors of things, all that type of stuff. If all of yours look a little bit different than mine, you can always get to that and change these compositions by either right-clicking and closing panels, or you can open new ones by going to Window, and you can see with these check marks which ones are turned on. When you create a project, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to either create your own work from scratch through solids, text, your own motion graphics, or you're going to be importing footage or video or photos to use. So let's start with that very basic workflow of using After Effects by importing a photo. So there's a couple different ways to do it. There's usually, a hotkey and maybe 2 or 3 different ways to do the same thing in After Effects like this. So we can either right click and go to Import, and go to File, and this is what you're going to use 99% of the time. So don't get too bogged down by all these other options for the moment. As we go through the course, you'll learn other ways to do things, but just focus on the things I'm showing you now and trust that you're going to learn what you need to know for the rest of the course later on. This is just intro level stuff so that we can get started. So I'm going to say import, and I'm going to click the picture that I want. I'm going to import that. So now we have it listed here. We can see the information. We can resize this to see other aspects of it. It's also listed here, the dimensions. And now, what do we do with that? We need to put it in a composition. So to create a new composition, again, there's a couple different ways to do that. You can hit Control-N, which is a hotkey, which you can find, all my most favorite hotkeys. Don't worry about remembering those right now. They're on a cheat sheet that I provided in the downloadable course materials. You can also click this button right here, which is fairly new in the last few years of After Effects, because it's one of the most common things. You got to have a composition to even work in the program. So they put front and center right there. So the other way I like to do it is to create a new composition with this little button down here, because I'm kind of how I started. So let's create a new composition by clicking that. We have the settings. The settings I like to use are HDTV 1080-24. And 1080 means it is high definition. 24 means the frame rate, which is common to the United States for animation. This harkens back to TV standards. So if you're in Europe, you might be more familiar with using 25 frames per second. So I'm going to leave this as is, because all these settings we can change after the fact. So if you have a checkered view right here, don't fret. All that is just this little toggle button down here. We can toggle transparency on or off. And this is black because that's what was in our composition settings. If I hit Control K, I bring that back up. You can also get to composition settings by going to composition settings here, and of course see that hotkey. So we can change the background color if we wanted with this. I'm just going to leave it as is, but just don't worry if you have a checkered. That's just to show a personal preference if you want to view transparency through this or through black. So don't worry too much about that just yet. So now we have an empty composition. There's nothing in it, but we have this photo. So there's two ways to bring in the photo. You either click and drag and drop it here, but then the anchor point, the middle of the image is going to be wherever I let go. So I don't like that. I want it to be centered. I don't want to have to click more buttons as I go through and align stuff after the fact. So I like to click and drag it and drop it in the composition timeline down here. So we can see that the image is way too big for our HD because we know from looking at the dimensions, it's much bigger than HD. So let's run through some of the transform hotkeys that you'll be using, very common, and they're easy to remember because it's the first letter of each of the words. So for position, we have P. If I click P with this layer selected, I'll get the position attributes, which I can adjust here. I can also separate these values. If I go to right-click the position attribute, and then I can go to separate dimensions. I can also get to rotation by hitting R, and then I can get to scale by hitting S. And that's what we need to adjust this. This chain link just means it's going to move uniform together in the X and Y values. So I'm going to leave that on, and then I'm going to click and drag the number. And this is how you change almost all the values in After Effects if you don't want to type them in. So it gets a little difficult to click and drag here. So I'm going to hold down Control, and that's going to slow the value change down. So I have finer control over what it's doing. If you want it to move a greater value, just hold down Shift while you click and drag. So we've gone over the most basic features and workflows and the workspace attributes that you're going to encounter when you work with After Effects. In the next lesson, we're going to get into some of the most fundamental animation tools and principles so that you actually have something to watch. Because right now, this timeline, if we click and drag the timeline, nothing's going on. We have a static image and there's no animation. So let's learn a little more how to use After Effects in the next lesson. Thanks for watching.